The Sportsman's Alliance of Maine welcomes you to Conserving the Maine Outdoors on Legacy 1160 WSKW. Now, here are David and Mike.
Welcome. This is David, and I'm sitting with Greg McNeil, who will be filling in for my co-host, Mike Shaw. Mike Shaw is one of those working guys, has a family, and he's on call, and guess what? The coincidence was that he got called into work today. So we have a couple of guests today, and one of them I've known for a long, long time, whether he realizes it or not. I followed him since I was a kid. Paul Reynolds, who's the editor of the Northwood Sporting Journal, one of my favorite outdoor peoples here today. I was so thankful that he was willing to come on the show, and I look forward to interviewing him. In addition, we have another guest, Ginny Hurley, who is, in my opinion, Sam's best writer. She has a very interesting story to tell, and I think you'll find when we get into the interview exactly what I mean by that. So I'm going to start right in, Ginny. I'm going to start with you. Okay. And Greg, feel free to jump in anytime you want. Sure. Because I know he will, and he's a big Marine, and he's twice my size. So if he jumps in, I'm getting out of the way. So with that, I'm going to get right into it. Ginny, when I first met you, I recognized you had some skills, and especially when it came to writing and articulating the way you felt about things. And you've been a SAM member now for a while, but you weren't always an outdoor lady. And I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself and where you came from and how you ended up in Maine as a great outdoors lady.
Well, I was born in Connecticut, actually, and I lived in the suburbs of Manchester, Connecticut. I always did love the outdoors, but I never hunted or anything like that because my dad was a veteran of the Second World War, and he had been disabled, and he just forbade guns. He hated guns. He would not let me even have a toy gun. So hunting was something that never really came on my radar. But I ended up moving up to Maine in 2006 and helped run a bed and breakfast for a number of years, and then had another life change and discovered that I really did love the outdoors. I had the good fortune to become friends with a woodsman and a man who was a Maine guide, and he did it all. He hunted, he trapped, he fished, he canoed. And in talking with him, I became really fascinated about the challenge of the hunt and why you did it, and the animal management aspect of it. And it just seemed very practical. And he started to tell me about deer hunting and told me what deer sign to look for, and so I did. I went out into my woods. I had 60 acres in Richmond at the time, and I started to be able to see what he was talking about. And it was like discovering a silent language that these deer were using to communicate, and it was a thrill. So I got on a deer trail, and I found what I thought was a great spot and climbed up a tree. Said, I think this really would be a great spot. There was rubs, there was scrapes, there was trails, and so I ended up putting a stand there. I didn't do that myself, of course. I had no idea. But I got my first buck in that stand. The first time I did see a little buck come out, and he was broadside. He was a perfect shot. But I couldn't pull the trigger. I couldn't do it. So I didn't do it. And a few mornings later, I got my courage up again. I came back, and he came out the same place. And I knew this was the moment. I knew it was going to be a good, clean shot, and I took him. But I wasn't prepared for gutting him out. I didn't even have a knife. I wasn't prepared. So I called my friend, the guide, and he happened to be hunting. He was in a tree stand, and he was in the middle of a hunt. So he had to whisper all the answers to my questions. He said, "Go back and get a knife." So I did, and then I got back to the deer, and he said, "Well, you all know how to gut out a deer, but I didn't." And all those directions, put your finger here, cut around here. I was gagging, and the smoke, the vapors from the aroma and the stink of every organ in that deer was overwhelming, but I got it done, and I was so proud. And I think that I was really hooked from that moment. Actually, I did turkey hunt, but I'm really a deer hunter. That's my favorite. Yeah. And I feel like I'm just really gripped by this love and this passion for the challenge of the sport.
Well, you've told me that story before, and what really impressed me the most was that you did this all on your own, and you had the courage to try it and do it. And what you'd said about not knowing these different components of it, having a mentor, somebody to help you along that process is key. I will come back for just a second that being accepted as what we call flatlanders or out-of-staters, and I say that just kind of tongue-in-cheek, but being accepted, what I've seen in my life is Maine people are good people, and they want to share their experience. Yeah. So that's kind of a misnomer. It's not a surprise to me when you told me that story, how welcomed you were into the, I don't know, fraternity or whatever you'd want to call it, but your experience is one that's been shared by thousands of people going back over decades, and it's part of what I believe it just lures you to the outdoors, and it's that challenge, that one-on-one challenge. And what I admired about your story was the courage that you had to do it all by yourself, and that's impressive, especially without the kind of background that some of us have had since we grew up. You know, my dad and all my uncles and my brothers, we all did it. We just assumed it. That, you know, that was the way everybody did it, but it's not. And it's kind of a reflection, I think, of the newer generation and how a generation was skipped as to teaching these skills and passing them on. So for you, it's a very impressive story. And you don't just deer hunt either. You do other things, because I've seen pictures of you with brook trout. I've seen pictures of you out turkey hunting and doing other things. So you've actually touched on trapping a little bit. Can you tell us about that?
I had a chance to bear trap a few years ago, and I've beaver trapped and caught some muskrat. And in learning how to do that, I had asked my friend, I said, this is before I really became a trapper, I said, why do you do that? And I said it with that attitude, like, why? Like, you killer. And he stopped for a minute and he said, to match wits with the animals. And that really intrigued me, because I could see that there was really more to this. And that's kind of what really intrigued me about it, is you had to learn these animals. You had to figure out and strategize. And I think that that's something that I really enjoy more than actually the catch or the kill, is figuring out how to be successful, reading the sign, trying to know their personality, their patterns, their habits, their terrain. And I'm a curious person, and that's why I like that aspect of it.
Interesting that you would say that. Back years ago, I was injured on the job, and I had a year off from work where I had to recover from surgery. And that was generally how I learned to deer hunt, was being absolutely bored and being driven crazy by not being able to get out and work. Every day I'd go out for a walk on the family property, which is 240 acres on a massive meadow. It's just an amazing wildlife habitat. And I did exactly what you just described. I went out every day and I'd find a new trail. I would try to determine where they were feeding, where they were escaping to, where they were bedding down. And it really was how I learned most of what I have for skills now as a hunter, was in that time I spent not hunting or harvesting an animal, but learning about them. Yeah. And I think that's really what the foundation of a good hunter is, to do that. It's hard work sometimes. It takes a lot of time, but it's really how you become successful. Yeah. And so I really connected with what you were talking about, because I think we all go through that lesson cycle, and you just did it at a different part in your life than most people.
I think one of the things too, Ginny, is what's interesting about that is what you did and what you learned about yourself by going out there and reading that book, which is nature, and looking at it and having something in your mind. So that basically tells me that you are very inquisitive, number one. Number two, you had something inside you, and it tells you about yourself and how you could cope with something like that. A lot of people would would not be able to do what you did, really. And I find that interesting. Obviously it stayed with you for your whole life. It was a life-changing thing.
Yep. And it's a lifetime learning.
Yes.
You can always learn something new, and that's what's exciting about it. And every time you go out in nature, you have the potential for an adventure, a thrill, even if it's a little thrill.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Ginny. One of my favorite moments last hunting season, I was sitting in my stand and I heard thump, thump, thump. I didn't know what it was. I looked down the ladder of my tree stand, and there was a squirrel, and he jumped from step to step, and he got all the way to the top. And I was trying to be as still as I could, and when he got to the top, he saw me, and he flew about 6 feet across and landed in a tree right in front of me. And I've remembered that ever since. It was one of my favorite moments of the whole hunting season. So I can connect with what you're saying and how you describe it. So you never know.
You never know.
An owl could land next to you and look at you and sit there for a bit. And
during turkey season this year, I have to just say this. I was in my blind. I had my slate. It's really early. I started with my slate. And these deer came out. And I looked and I did it again. They came closer. They all came. 5 deer I called in with a turkey slate. I saw more deer in turkey season than I did last year, I think.
Wow, that's amazing.
And
Curiosity.
It was a thrill.
Yeah, sure
that was more of a thrill than when I actually killed the turkey, which I did, but that's a whole nother story.
Yeah. Well, we may get back to that story. I am going to stop here and just take a quick break. I want to come back and bring our other guest into this because I think he really has a contrast and some experience going back years, and we want to talk with him. And I'll have both of you as part of this discussion. But it's nice to see the old school in the new school, and we'll put you guys together and see what we can come up with for an interesting discussion.
Sounds good.
I'll be right back.
Conserving the Maine Outdoors will be right back. Conserving the Maine Outdoors is back. Here are David and Mike.
Welcome back. And we have another guest. I'm sitting with Greg McNeil, who's sitting in for Mike Shaw, my co-host this week, who's out on a train, and he's taking passengers down the railroad tracks. So a little call out to Mike. We miss you, but we have a very competent replacement with Greg McNeil. My next guest is somebody that I've known for a long, long time. I don't want to give my age away, but I'm 57. It's been a long time.
You're not going to ask me, right?
No. We were talking a little earlier about going back, and he called himself old. I didn't even dare to track down that little minefield. But I've known Paul Reynolds for a long time, and going back to when I was living in the Waterville area, and I remember reading the newspaper. We would get the Bangor Daily News delivered, and I couldn't wait to read various writers that were in there, and you included, Paul. And I remember people like Gene Letourneau and Bud Levitt, and just a generation of outdoor writers that I admired at the time. And I want to talk a little bit today about that era and how things have changed. And it seems like some of those folks are disappearing and they're not being replaced. And it's sad because I think the written word within this world of computers and handheld devices, we're getting captured by this online Facebook stuff. But there's a lot of value in the written word, and people like yourself, Paul, have experienced the things that they're writing about, and it feels like that's disappearing, and it's sad to me. And with that, I want to jump right in with you. You were the editor, and you worked on the editorial page of the Bangor Daily News for a long time, and I've watched your writings and what you've done. You now are, I believe, publisher of the Northwood Sporting Journal.
Correct.
And editor as well. And you've written a lot of different stories in the outdoors and managed a lot of outdoor writing that I think has been very valuable to the state. So welcome to the show, and I wanted to talk with you, and maybe you could tell a little bit about yourself, and then we can get into some of the history of the outdoors in Maine.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I want to say it's the first time on radio I've seen so much video. Because I have a face for radio, as you know.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Before I tell you about myself, I want to say something that I've heard a lot of testimonials from women who have taken up hunting, and this was the most articulate, rendering account that I've ever heard. It was beautifully done.
Yeah, well,
Very
Ginny's
well done.
definitely. I can tell you that I've learned to respect her very, very quickly, and she just has a way about her, and that's why I've invited her to be a writer in the Sam News so much, and she's done a terrific
with
job.
so many of these outdoor TV hunting programs that really don't tell you the story, to hear it from somebody like her is so refreshing.
Absolutely.
Would you agree?
I do.
Yeah.
I do, actually, because I think you're spot on when you come to that. And the way you tell the story and the meaning, you can get the meaning from the way the story is being told
You
and
bet.
how it impacted the individual.
Yeah. Anyway, just nicely done. I was the editor at the Bangor Daily for 20 years before it became a little bit of a left-wing paper that it is. Can I say that? I guess I can.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was a great experience, and I learned a lot in the newspaper business. And right now, I'm editor-publisher of the Northwood Sporting Journal, and Dave, they're still writing about the outdoors. And the
Yes.
Northwood Sporting Journal has 50 writers who write about the outdoors.
Yeah, and I do some of that with you.
You
once in a
do,
while.
yeah. You write a great column. We appreciate that.
Yep.
Thinking about this, I've been a deer hunter for over 60 years. You believe that, right?
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm passionate about it. It's my favorite. I hunt other critters, but I do like deer hunting for all the challenges that you covered. There have been a lot of changes, Dave, as you know, and some of the issues that bother me today, one is access to the land. I don't know if you have that experience, but where I live up in the Bangor area, my former hunting areas have all been posted. And it's discouraging, and I'm sure it discourages a lot of people who'd like to hunt but give it up.
Yeah, I hear that all
because of the lack
time.
of access.
Yeah, I hear that all the time, Paul.
It's a big issue.
Yeah, we don't know where to go. I had that discussion with Judy Camuso, the Commissioner of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. I believe they have about 100,000 acres of their own land, and it's a lot of times they don't even develop that land. They don't, but their wildlife management areas are perfect hunting areas. It's time, I think, part of the solution is to work with private landowners, but also there's a lot of public lands that people can hunt on, and it's time to figure out where they are and how we get access to them. So.
Yeah, I think if you're willing to go north, there's all kinds of access. We have unprecedented access. But in areas where I live, near Ellsworth, Hancock County, a lot of those places used to be open. Now they're not. And I see signs that say hunting with permission only, with no telephone number, no name, so you don't know who to contact. I think that's a problem. And I know Fish and Wildlife has been fighting this battle, as you know, for years and years.
Yeah.
I hope they're making some headway, but we really have a problem there, I think.
I agree with that. It's hard to bring new people in when they say to you, "Where can I go hunting?" And
you bet.
I have no answer for them. Yeah.
The other issue that I think really needs to be talked about and addressed is you touched upon it. Young people today are not learning to hunt and fish because they're all wrapped up in electronic devices. I think you'd agree. This is really, if we're gonna promote the heritage, this is something that has to be addressed. Don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I have an education center that we're developing here in Augusta. I think we're up to around 95 or 100 acres, and one of the issues or one of the requirements for us is that minimal use of cell phones, minimal use of any kind of electronics. When we invite you to come learn about the outdoors, I'd like to think you could disconnect for a little while from social media and these devices to kind of smell the roses. And so we try to subtly teach that. We don't want to turn people off where they turn around and leave either. But there has to be some recognition that living in that social world is not really living in the outdoors. It doesn't mix well. And so I agree with you 100%. How we connect in a way that we don't offend people, get them to put those things away for a little while so that they can do much like Ginny and just experience something new in its purest form without the other stuff.
And looking ahead to the future and the heritage we talked about, one of the good things is that more and more women, like Ginny, are taking up hunting and fishing, which is a good thing. And I think that has some hope for the heritage.
Yeah.
But we need young people. We need to find a way to reach young people and mentor young people. And everybody writes about it, take a kid fishing, take a kid hunting. And we hope that happens more and more because we have to do that to keep the heritage going.
Yeah. One of the exciting things that Ginny, she doesn't realize that her personal story had triggered me into thinking about a way to address it was when she talked about her story about how to dress an animal. Becky, who's doing the filming today, she manages the State of Maine Sportsman Show, and we had arranged for Rick Laflamme, who works with the Landowner Relations Program and has a meat cutter history in his family, was going to present how to dress an animal with an actual white-tailed deer. Literally start from the process, how to dress it, how to skin it, how to quarter it, and then at the end of the day, he was going to cut it up and cook some of it. And that was one of the new exciting pieces of the State of Maine Sportsman Show when this COVID hit and we had to reschedule till next year. It was too bad because Rick, first of all, is a very creative guy. He's funny as can be. He's a game warden who's now there running the Landowner Relations Program. But I think you would have found that would have been one of the more attended events of the show, of the seminars that we do. So,
I would have gone.
Oh yeah, we're gonna record that in the future when we do finally run that. We're gonna take a lot of grief from the animal rights folks. We don't really care. I've given up on caring what they think sometimes because some I do and respect because their hearts are in the right place, but there are others that just will never accept under any condition what we do as far as hunting, trapping, fishing, and we just need to recognize that and move on. So.
I want to touch upon another thing. Is that you asked about? Obviously, I'm here because I'm such an old guy. No. I wear my scars with pride. But one of the things that I see happening that perplexes and mystifies me, and I don't have any answers, but I'm sure you must be aware of it. I hope everybody is the incredible speed that our culture is changing. It's like nothing I've ever seen in my life. Nobody knows how it's going to end up, but these cultural, societal changes are happening at such a high rate of speed. It makes you wonder where it's going to end up. And of course, rock bottom of all of that is gun rights, Second Amendment. And if this country keeps heading the way it seems to be heading in the last couple of months, our gun rights, our Second Amendment rights are going to be in peril. I've never seen anything like it in my life.
No, I know, and I agree with you.
I hate to be so negative, but this is the feeling I have.
I think part of it's connected to the social media and the speed at which social media. When I'll give an example, because this racial issue is in front of us all now, and it's blossoming into, like you said, who knows where it's going to end. But this NASCAR driver that the noose was.
Oh yeah. The hoax, yeah.
There's an element that immediately jumps to the conclusion that everything is bad, and the speed at which that went across social media, the FBI stepped in and said, wait a minute, this is a pull rope for an overhead door. But so many people out there in the world wanted to believe the worst. And the media jumped on it immediately. Oh yes,
assumed it was a racist activity.
Right, yeah. And but it's social media and the speed that you're talking about, I think mostly driven by social media and the competition to get the story out before anybody else does. And that's where journalism, and I know that's the world that you came from, journalism and good quality journalism suffers because of it. And I was struck by some recent surveys that said the general public is losing faith not only with their government but with journalism as a whole. And that's a trend that must be turned around because that's where we get most of our information.
I don't want to get you fired from your show or anything, but journalism is corrupt. Yikes. I taught journalism at the University of Maine. I'm a creature of the newsroom. Journalism in America is corrupt, Dave. It really, truly is.
I'm not going to argue with you.
And if we had 3 hours, I think I could convince you.
Yeah, and I think you
Maybe I don't have to convince you.
You don't probably have to convince many people that are listening because there has to be a level of trust, and that trust can creep into other places. It can creep into the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Justice, the courts. As a whole, there's so many things that are connected nowadays, and you have to, in my opinion, be very careful. Because people need to have faith in those components of their government, journalism. There has to be a source where you can get the truth. And if we lose all those sources, it's anarchy.
We're headed in that direction, I fear.
Well, it's interesting because as you're talking, I'm thinking about my childhood and how I grew up. Excuse me. And there was always those people that you trusted. Whether it be your grandfather, your father, your family members, your friends. And to learn, you talk about access to property. When I was a kid, there was no fences. You could when in the summer, my mother told me to be home at such and such a time for a meal, and we'd go out and the neighborhood kids would roam, through the woods. We would just go, and hunting was the same way. We could just go, and I grew up in Surrey, Maine. I went to school in Ellsworth High School, but listening to this and then thinking where we are today, and whether we were watching Walter Cronkite on TV for news, or we were watching Bud Levitt Saturday afternoon, evenings, having the baked beans, and it was a ritual in my house. My grandfather watched that all the time, and heaven forbid if we got in the middle
you
of
must
that.
be almost as old as I am.
I probably am. But it's those things, and right now,
Yeah, I remember those days.
there's no trust, and
Yeah.
you trust yourself. And you talk about guns. When I was growing up, everybody, every family, every 14-year-old, 15-year-old, 16-year-old boy, not so many young women were going out, but hunting was in our blood. It was deer season. And by golly, you were going to go deer hunting today.
And you could take your 22 to school and put it in the locker.
Correct.
Yeah.
No kidding.
I did that with my 12-gauge shotgun.
Yeah.
I take it to the Clinton
You
school.
say that to somebody today, and they would say, you're crazy. That's
And school
impossible."
shootings and all those things.
Yeah.
We've lost touch with reality. We're not centered anymore with our heritage. And in the state of Maine, we have a really strong heritage, but it's going away. It's slowly in some places and quickly in others, whether it be southern Maine or northern Maine, and all points in between. It's kind of discouraging because it was a good time of life where you could trust people.
Well, what you had mentioned, Paul, about the connection to the land, it's what created that culture that I think that so many of us remember, and I know you remember it. I grew up that way. Many times my uncle would come down. He owned a big dairy farm in Clinton, the Rogers farm. He would come get me on a Saturday morning, and we'd go out and we'd shovel grain or whatever we needed to do. And the reward for that was not going to the pool. It was grabbing the shotgun and going hunting or doing something outdoors, going fishing. We didn't, as kids, we didn't even have an introduction to some of this stuff, social media, going to the movies, all that. We didn't care about that. We just wanted to jump on our bikes and go fish the Tannery Brook or go bird hunting or rabbit hunting up on the Rogers farm. And that's I think, the glue that bonds that connection to the land and creates the conservationists that I think we need to foster in the outdoor community. And Ginny is part of that. You're not going to have as many of those kids that are coming up through and learning those things. And this part of introducing people like Ginny, who I think are open-minded and fair, are going to look at those experiences and find a road they want to walk on. Mm-hmm. And that's the comfort levels that you feel in the outdoors. But to get them through that transition and to open their eyes and try to have that experience is the people that we want to reach. And I think you're a perfect example of that. You didn't come in with predetermined judgments based on somebody else's opinion. You came in and made your own judgments.
Yep, I did. And I feel that passing on the heritage and keeping the traditions, I agree that they're so important, and we all have to do that. I have a 10-year-old grandson in Massachusetts who has been sort of following my hunting exploits for about 3 years. He came up the first summer and he said, "I want to hunt just like Gigi." And I didn't know that he was going to say that. And I said, "Well, Patrick, this is really hard. You have to learn a lot of stuff." He has no clue. I went and got my booklet from the Hunter Safety course, thinking he's going to look at that and he's going to say, "Yeah, that is really tough." Instead, he looks at me and he says, "Gigi, get me a pencil." And he starts working on the workbook. And this family is not happy with me.
Oh,
They're not happy because they don't have that background. But I think this boy is really destined to be out in the woods with me because he won't give it up.
Unfortunately, he has to fight the current, and that's sad.
It is sad. Yep. But we have to take it on. We have to present these skills to the next generation however we can. and I'm in for it. I am.
I was down at a wedding in Connecticut, down in a kind of a liberal area of Connecticut, and I was sitting after the wedding. We were at a big table dining and having a wonderful time, and there were a couple of ladies who were complaining about the fact that these deer around, in fact, it was near Lyme, Connecticut, as a matter of fact, said that these deer have been just, damaging all of their landscaping and eating all their flowers. And what are we going to do? We've got to do something about that. And being from Maine and an avid bow hunter, I suggested, what you need to do is invite some bow hunters in to kill some of those deer, cull the herd a bit, save your problem. And you would think that I just dropped a hand grenade on the floor. I mean, it was just, their eyes got big and they were disgusted. And they never spoke to me the rest of the evening.
Wow.
So, there are a lot of prejudices against people who hunt.
Right. And some of these same individuals, Paul, have never experienced hunting. They have no idea what it is.
And they don't want to know.
No, that's right. That's right. They've already closed their mind. They've just shut out the concept. Yeah. And these very same people are munching on a burger while they're doing it, and they think that meat comes from the grocery store,
right.
And it doesn't. It doesn't. That's another point, Ginny, that I'll touch on with you because I think you appreciate it. The game that you harvest, the foraging that you do, it's fiddleheads or dandelion greens, whatever it is, it's as healthy as you can get. And I know that women in particular, because they raise children, are always very sensitive to the quality, the health nature of the food that they're giving their children, and
Sure.
and it's an area where we've talked a little bit about how to eat the game and the recipes and whatnot. And I think it's an area that we need to at SAM to work on. There are some wonderful dishes that you can put together from when you're beaver trapping. Most people think they do that for the hide. Beaver is a delicacy if it's prepared properly. I've had it many times, and it's very, very good. Bear, people complain about bear, but that can be very good if it's treated properly. Paul, you mentioned that earlier in a previous conversation. Is a certain pride to harvesting an animal, bringing it home, processing it, and then enjoying that for the rest of the year.
Well, that is. I've been reading about this in there's a book. Fabulous book. It was a real tome I read. I've forgotten the name. About this fellow who was anti-hunting and discovered wild meat, and it changed his life. He took up eventually, in the long run, he took up hunting, and he wrote a best-selling book, and I've forgotten the name of it. Maybe you've read it. Anyway, the point was that we're in an era right now where people are very health conscious, as you said. They're looking for organic products and so forth. And this has the potential to bring people who were previously either neutral or anti-hunting to attract their interest because of the fact that wild meat is, A, so delicious to eat, most of it, although I differ with you on beaver. Anyway, it was sweet. I didn't like it. But everything else wild I've eaten, I've enjoyed. But it has the potential to get other people interested in the act of hunting because of the potential to get delicious wild meat. It's high in protein, low in fats, good for you.
Yeah.
And so this will attract a certain element, I think, to hunting.
Yeah, I have a recipe that I use. A lot of people, when I was growing up, would say, I don't like that deer hamburger. It's terrible. It's too strong. And I have a tuche pie recipe. For those that are listening that have ever had tuche pie, I use some sausage seasonings in that. And when I go to camp, part of the reason I think I was invited to be one of 6 partners in 2 camps was because of my recipe. I wouldn't share it with people, so they had to invite me to have a pie or two. And so every time I go to camp, the first request that I get is to bring a venison tuche pie with me, and I do, and it gets gobbled up first thing.
Yeah. Paul, you just haven't had the right beaver.
Maybe
It depends on what they've eaten.
Maybe that's it.
And you've never had beaver shish kebab, I bet.
No, I've had beaver burger, and I didn't care for it.
Oh, well, you have to marinate it and, put a little spice here and
right?
there.
Yeah.
Yes, it's
Have you
very
tried it?
good. Oh, I did.
It?
I used to serve it at cocktail parties, and people never knew until afterwards. I wouldn't tell them.
Oh, wow. You survived it.
I have a sister whose name will go unmentioned, but she's kind of anti-hunting. The rest of my family isn't, but she is, and she refused to ever eat wild meat at our home. And my wife Diane made a lasagna out of moose burger, and she served it to my sister, who had 2 helpings and loved it. And we told her afterward what she'd eaten. Oh. She was just not happy with us. But she liked the lasagna.
Yeah. With that thought, we're going to take another brief break, and we're going to come back. And I think we should share a few recipes, because I've learned a lot. Especially, I want to try the shish kebabs that Ginny was talking about. But we'll come back. We'll talk a little bit more about sort of where the outdoor community is and where maybe you think it's going in the future. And then we'll share a recipe or two. Good. All right. Thanks. We'll be right back.
Sheriff John here. Before we go any further, I'm going to put you on the spot. You're going to have to share a recipe for that venison touche pie. Okay. Sorry, you put yourself out there, buddy. Okay. They're not going to have to invite you anymore after this. All right. We'll be right back.
Right. Conserving the Maine outdoors. We'll be right back. Conserving the Maine outdoors.
Welcome back, and I'll remind listeners who's sitting around the table with me, besides the sheriff, Becky behind the video camera over there, and we're going to get back to recipes here in a minute. She's got some pretty good recipes for white perch, but Greg McNeil is a board member, a retired Marine, and I call him my in-house tough guy. But and then Paul Reynolds, who I've admired for a long, long time. He's the
retired Navy. Retired
Navy, all right. So, and then Ginny Hurley, who is one of the writers for the Sam News and a new person to the outdoors, but soon becoming one of our favorites. So, with that, I want to get back to a few recipes real quick. Becky just came in. I took her and her son out fishing, and she's quite the outdoors lady too, and she's taken a few deer. But anyway, we got a mess of white perch, and I call them a mess of white perch because that's what Maine people do. Filleted them out for them, and she took them home and came back in with a big white perch chowder. Oh, it was yummy. Oh, it was yummy. It's as close to haddock as you'll ever get, and the way you doctored up, Becky, is pretty impressive. But anyway, it was good. It was gone in 2 days. but good thing about Maine is this is the time of year when the perch are biting, so maybe we'll get another batch of them. So I'm going to tell you what my favorite recipe is for white perch, and then you guys can jump in with your favorite recipes real quick, and then we'll get back to the political stuff. Back a few years ago, I had taken Becky's daughter, Kelsey, out bird hunting. And I know this isn't fish, but I'll get to that in a minute. And she's a pretty good wing shot. She took a couple partridge. And I said, well, later today we'll stop and I'll get out my grill and I'll cook those up for you. So I was looking all through my box of goodies, and I could not find breading anywhere. So I said, geez, what am I going to do here? So anyway, there was a bag of chips left, and different types of chips. So I crunched up some potato chips, and I put them on the breading for the fillet of partridge, and man, was it yummy. And we gobbled that right up. So I said, I'm going to try this on white perch. So I don't know if I'm getting myself in trouble, but Humpty Dumpty is the best. Humpty Dumpty barbecued potato chips. You crunch them up real fine. You roll your perch fillet in scrambled egg. You pat on some of those crushed up barbecued potato chips and fry it up in real butter. And I'll tell you what, they don't last long on the plate. It's about as best I've ever prepared fish. So that's my favorite recipe by far.
That sounds so good.
It is yummy. It gives a little smoky flavor, and it's really good. All right, Paul, what's your favorite recipe?
I'm going to be a skunk at a lawn party here.
Okay.
This is what I think. I love good recipes. My wife is a superb cook. But I have a theory that if you take a venison backstrap, you know what that is, right?
Of course I know what it is.
And
you tell him, Ginny.
Or you take a venison backstrap, or you take moose or grouse, partridge. To me, the best thing to do is to simply get an iron skillet, put a little butter in there, maybe just a tad of garlic powder, and just quick fry it. Hot pan.
Zap. Oh yeah.
And to me, you can't beat that. I like the simplicity of it, and it's my favorite way to cook venison. It's just without any recipe, but a little bit of butter and a little light garlic, and cook it, fast but rare.
Well, we have
Yeah.
one of our partners on our camp who thinks just like you do. And when I got out that recipe for the white perch and the barbecued potato chips, he looked at me just like you did right there, with his eyes kind of squinted up, like, "What in the world are you doing? You're going to ruin that stuff." Well, before it was over with, and finally after about the fourth fry pan of perch fillets, he looks up at me and he goes, "You know what's wrong with this fish?" And I said, "What's that?" "You didn't bring enough of it." So I guess we're all...
I like the potato chip idea. That sounds
you
good,
try it out. It's really, really
I'm
good.
going to have to try that. I like that.
Yeah.
All right, Ginny, what's your favorite recipe?
My favorite one, and I just invented it this year, popcorn turkey.
Popcorn turkey.
I got a big Tom. Oh, he was big. There was so much meat on each side of the breast. I was thrilled. Anyway, I brined that for 24 hours, and then I took it and then I cut it into strips, and then I kind of chunked up some of it. And I dipped it in a batter, just kind of a typical batter with a little cayenne, a little garlic powder, a little pepper, your usual. And I deep fried that. Oh, my goodness, that was so good. Popcorn turkey.
That's good.
Yep.
All right, Greg.
I don't have a recipe. I'm an eater.
I noticed you do show up when we get off the grill and we're cooking away.
No. My wife is a great cook, and she's really done a lot of things with game. Moose meat's my favorite. Deer meat. Partridge is something that the bird, when you shoot on the ground, it's a grouse when you have a dog and it takes flight. So it's the same bird, but it's a different philosophy. Grouse is a gentleman's bird. Partridge is a Maine's bird where you're driving down the road and shoot it.
I'm gonna take.
I just wanted to kind of point that out because I put a lot of time in training the dogs to do those things.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
You're a bird dog, gun dog guy, right?
Yes.
So you're kind of a purist.
Yes.
Have you ever shot a grouse on the ground?
Not since I had dogs.
Oh, okay.
Wow, he's got a future in politics. I love it. All right.
But as a kid, yes. I mean, quite a few.
So with that, I'm going to jump right in here and get back to you.
Whoa.
His recipe.
The venison touche pie.
Oh, I told you I can't give that up. They won't need me at camp anymore.
Okay.
I'll give it to you off. Well, no, I won't.
It's like the Colonel, 7 herbs and spices. We don't know what it is.
I'm going to work myself out of a camp.
All
They
right.
won't invite me up there anymore.
I can empathize.
All right, Paul, I want to get back to you. You've been around this sort of culture, this heritage, this community for a long, long time. And I like to think that there's some hope out there that we can turn some of this around. And what I find is kind of like a diamond in the rough is some of the young people I meet, particularly because of some of the programs we do. I think the desire is still there, but it feels like they have to jump through barriers to get that experience, to get I'll use an example. I had a group from one of the organizations that uses our property, and they're high functioning autistic children, and we have a little shooting range. And when I mentioned the facility and we had a little shooting range, all of the kids jumped in and said, I want to try that. I want to try that. Of course, the instructors immediately pounced and said, no, we're not going there. So those kids have the desire. They want to try these things. But I think that the adults are the ones that are standing in the way of that.
You hit the nail on the head. Spot on. I couldn't agree with you more. Mm-hmm. I think there is something, we all come from hunters. Mm. You go back, all of our ancestors were hunters. I think it sounds corny, but I think it's in our DNA.
I do as well. We're
that.
gatherers. We're hunter-gatherers.
We're hunter-gatherers, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think probably not all children, but a lot of youngsters probably have that inherent drive to want to learn to do that. And I think there are adults who are trying to be politically correct, who may worry about the image in the neighborhood if Johnny goes out and learns how to hunt. Mm-hmm. And so there's a stigma there that has to be organizations like SAM, mm-hmm. publications like ours. We need to deal with that. We need to try to destigmatize the politically correct image that seems to be standing in the way. Yeah. And
I think the way that we present that in this 2020 environment is we're not going to tell kids what we think they should like you, Ginny, and the reason that I really wanted you to be on this show with Paul is that if we open up an avenue for young adults, for people who at any age want to try these things in a way that we're not judgmental, we say just whatever you want to try, we will make sure that we provide a safe environment for you to try that. I think that's a way to get past that barrier that's there now. Some of these youngsters that want to try it, we may not be able to reach them until they're young adults and they're making decisions for themselves. But we do have to recognize that there is that break there, that there's a cultural divide right now, and whoever on the other side was teaching people to dislike hunting, they were good at it and they were successful. And why I think it's important that we counter that is we need to manage our wildlife. And if we don't, we have too many bears, we have diseased animals, we have an environment that's unbalanced, we have disease being spread, whether it's rabies, whether it's ticks and Lyme disease. But there's a crucial role for outdoorsmen, hunters, sportsmen, conservationists to play in our world. And if we eliminate that generation, that culture, somebody's going to manage that wildlife. And what a waste that will be, because people will no longer appreciate wildlife.
I agree. And, it's a funny thing. I have a lot of grandchildren, as you might imagine. And in two different families, my sons and daughters, it was the females that were interested in hunting and fishing, not the males. In two different cases, the daughters became hunters and fishermen, and the males wanted nothing to do with it. So it's something in the makeup, I think. You know?
Yeah. I found that true of our. I do mentor a lot of young people, and I have a couple of young ladies that started out fishing with me, and now their dad is a policy advisor to the governor. Just sweet young ladies. They love to fish, just absolutely love it. And so I found the same thing is true. Whoever it is, I don't care if it's female, male, whatever. If you open the doors, you let them see it and experience it on their own and not pressure them. Don't pressure them to do one thing or the other. I think it is the resource that pulls them, not us.
You bet.
And there's a screen that's been pulled over their eyes, and we just have to just pull the screen up and let them have that experience.
If there's nothing else about this whole COVID-19 thing that I find interesting, is that by staying in the house and self-quarantining, the family has come a little bit closer together, and they're understanding each other a little bit more. And that, I think, really becomes truer, like at the SAM Youth and Family Center. We've got a stocked pond there. And David was telling me the story of a young kid and his dad or grandfather or somebody that brought him to the pond to go fishing. And they were catching fish, as you quite imagine. It's a stocked pond, so it's guaranteed success. And there's nothing like a young child, catching a fish, seeing that bobber go underwater and bringing something in. And there was one young man that basically, you were telling me the story about the young boy that talked about the pond and how it being the greatest fishing pond in the state of Maine.
Becky's smiling over there.
Yeah.
And that's right. That was said, and I think it was said to Becky that, this is the best place in Maine to fish.
So that kid's hooked for life. And it was his family member that brought him. And maybe without the COVID-19, they may not have been, trying to look for things to do because they couldn't go to the arcades, or if there is arcades anymore. But those types of things are what really give me hope as far as, introducing them the proper way where they have success, it's safe. Then that young man is going to want to do it again. And families come to that place constantly and use it for those types of things. It's kind of recreation, and it's awesome. It really is.
So, Ginny, I see you wanted to jump in there.
I did. I wanted to add something that I think is important, that we know that technology of video games and phones and all that stuff is definitely an interference. It's definitely a distraction. And if you look at what kids are playing, boys or girls, mostly boys, it's adventures. There's noise, there's explosions, there's guns being shot off, there's success, there's failure, there's win, there's lose. It's an adventure, but it's not a real adventure. The real adventure is outdoors. when you're involved with hunting, with fishing, with trapping, with all those success, failure, win, lose, noise, the unknown, figuring it out. That's part of our hope, is that innate desire for an adventure. That I had 4 boys, so I know they seek adventure. And this is what we can offer, because that is real. It's being satisfied right now through technology. It's replaced the real thing, but the desire for the real thing is not going away.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, for me, it will never replace it, because I've seen the sunrise, listen to the woods when it's 28 degrees and you can hear every animal moving about. You're not going to get that on a video game.
Nope.
You're not going to get it on a handheld.
Nope.
And unless you've experienced it for yourself, you don't know what that rush is like when you hear that deer coming. And whether you get the animal or not, when you hear the woods wake up and you know these animals are all around you, there's a rush there. And maybe people are getting that through other venues like the social media and other places, and drugs and alcohol, but somebody told me just recently that when they want to have a drink, they just go out in the outdoors and enjoy it, and that gives them everything they would get out of something else.
Oh, that's a great thing. Yeah.
So with that discussion, I know we have a little bit of time left. I wanted to get back to Paul, because I know that you mentored new young writers. At one time you taught a class, and I think that is disappearing very, very fast. That not only the appreciation for the outdoors, but the ability to articulate it through the written word. I used to love to read columns from Gene Letourneau, and you see the Tom Hennessy drawings and the Bud Levitts, and George Smith, previous director of SAM, is a really good writer, and he's done a lot of that. If we lose that ability to communicate through the written word, I think that culture is going to be more difficult to connect to.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we're doing, and our competition, Maine Sportsman's doing, we're running youth writers. We have a youth writing contest, and we get young folks to write about their experience, in the outdoors. And then we pick some winners, like half a dozen. We give them a $50 check. And that's sort of catching on. That's one way to get youngsters interested. But I think the larger issue is that so many people have lost the habit of reading. They don't read anymore because
they don't write either.
TV, social media, and that's right. If you're going to be a good writer, you got to be a good reader. And so there's some dangers there, David. I agree. And I think young people need to be reading books as well as playing video games. And I don't know what the answer to that is. I'm an old parent, so I don't have to worry about that anymore. But I worry about my grandchildren. Yeah. And too much social media, too much clicking on the iPhone, too many video games. It needs to be managed by responsible parents. That's the only answer, I guess.
Yeah. I went over with my wife and mother-in-law to Bar Harbor last weekend, and we stopped at a few antique shops on the way back. And when I was getting ready to leave, this was a really nice quality antique shop. I noticed a book, Portrait of Nature, that was sitting on a chair, an antique chair, and I didn't care about the chair. I went over and I started leafing through, and the author was not only an author, but he was a painter, and it reminded me of the Tom Hennessy piece that you did, Ginny. Yeah. And I ended up buying the book, which is unusual for me. It's pretty hard to get a $20 bill out of my wallet, and I had to bring 3 or 4 of them. So I ended up buying the book, and I'm going to display it in the SAM Conference Center, because I think it catches that era that we've been talking about, the Tom Hennessy era, where I believe the painters, the reason they were so good at capturing wildlife was because they were connected to the environment. They were out in it. They were experience those animals in the wild, in their natural setting, and they could capture that. Back to you, Ginny, when you were talking about the video games. You can't capture nature in a video game. You have to be out there and see it. And that's what I hope doesn't get lost, is that ability to not only see them, but then grow to love them and appreciate them, want to conserve them, protect them, and manage them in a reasonable fashion. And I think that's why it's important to get the people out there. Yeah. If you've ever seen maybe paint turtles sitting on a log, it can be mallard ducks raising little ones, whatever it is, you need to see it to appreciate it.
Right. Yeah.
And so, I don't know. Let's hope that there's some newbies out there that take it up, that can articulate that. But if not, then we have to foster it. We have to find a way to get.
We do. Yeah, we have to. I mean, I feel like I really want to be pass the torch
a mentor
to the next. I do. I know it's important, and I have this kind of also. This is totally aside, but I have this little apocalyptic view, like not if the grid goes down, but when the grid goes down,
yeah.
Or when whatever happens, where we're forced to hunt, we're forced to forage, we're forced to deal with no technology. Who's going to know how to do it? We are. And we have to make sure that
somebody knows.
Our descendants all know how to do that for many reasons.
This sort of gets over into politics a little bit, but I think it's because politics figure into everything that's happening in our world.
Absolutely.
It affects the heritage. I think you would agree. And I think the point that Greg made was a good one, is that the nuclear family is being threatened right now by what's happening in this country. If we lose the traditional way of life, i.e. the nuclear family, then it's going to look pretty grim for that outdoor heritage, because it's the nuclear family that's going to train and introduce these young kids to the things we love. Without that, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. When I was watching some of the rioting going on, the individuals, the young people that were, I think, protesting, and they didn't even really understand a lot of why they were protesting. They were just part of a mob.
Yeah.
These people were saying they wanted less violence against African Americans. We all want that. We don't want racial injustice in the world, but throwing firebombs through windows and burning down businesses, all of those businesses are owned by somebody. They could be families, generations of families that built those businesses up to where they are. And just out of some frustration and mob mentality, they're burning them to the ground and destroying that what could have taken decades to build. When we start getting into that mentality, where does it go from there? And so as a society, I'm with you, Paul, we need to figure this thing out and figure it out very quickly. When the leadership of this country sits idly by and watches that, it's in a sense condoning it.
Oh, that's the most perplexing, scary thing, is that the leadership in this country is not speaking out. I think they're afraid and intimidated. They're so afraid that they will lose their profit margin, or they'll be accused of being a racist. They're not speaking out against this, and it's very troubling. And as a veteran, you probably would agree with me, when I see them tearing down a statue of Ulysses S. Grant, that's the stupidest thing you could do if you're worried about slavery. I mean, he saved the slaves, and they're tearing down his statue and burning it. What is this?
They've
makes
lost
no sense.
Right, they've lost their way, and they're just basically reacting to something that initially was really, really, really bad, and then they just took advantage of it and took their message, and it's a cancel culture. Nothing is sacred anymore, and that's really what's kind of discouraging, because you talked about the nuclear family. Just as one quick thing, I had my nephew came up. They lived in Roanoke, Virginia. I took him for a walk in the woods. He was scared to death. He had never been in the woods before.
Really?
Wow. Never been in the woods before, and he was absolutely scared to death. I had to walk around the corner and show him that you can still see the house. We're not that far away. But that's really, and those people who live in those cities, now I'd probably be scared to death walking into the inner city. Okay,
Me too.
let's be honest. But that's really what we're up against. But he's a whiz on video games, and it's kind of sad, because we did introduce him. Myself and my wife taught him how to read a map and a compass and those types of things. But still, that's what we're up against, to Paul's point.
And I think the challenge for groups like yours is to figure out how you fit in to this new matrix that's happening in this country.
Yeah.
And I think Sam has always been a force for good, and I admire all the great things you guys do. But this is a new era. You're going to have to rethink how to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
But one of the things, too, Paul, and you being in journalism, and you too, really what happens is when you write a story and you start to get it and understand and say, gosh, that's really good, but don't ever go down to the comment section, because what Facebook and everything else has done is given voice to these people that just are contrary. They just want to disagree, no matter what you say or do. And if you go down to the comments section and you read those things, you're going to say, what in the world? This is crazy. You know, why should I believe in this?
Yeah.
So when people ask, are you a hunter? You have to look at them, and before you answer the question, you have to say, okay, am I prepared to defend myself? Or do I just want to say, no, not really?
Yeah.
You know, and that's what we become.
Yeah.
We become people that are willing to accept what other people want us to think and do, as opposed to
The herd mentality.
Exactly.
That's
right.
what's happening right now.
Yeah. Well, with that, we've run out of time. I do want to wrap this up by saying that for you level-headed, common-sense people out there, please step up. This country needs you more now than ever. With that, we hope that individuals listening will consider joining the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine. The only way that we can be effective in what we do is to have membership. I hope you'll consider joining. With that, I can say out of all the shows that we've done, I've enjoyed this one the most. Thank you to my guests for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for inviting us.
You're
It was great.
welcome.
And I think they ought to get the Northwoods Sporting Journal and read that,
All
too.
right,
because
all
there's
right.
some
I
great things in
appreciate
there.
Absolutely.
All
We'll
right.
put a plug
Thank
in
you,
there
sir.
for the Northwood Sporting Journal.
Thank you, sir.
I've always read it. I do some writing for it, and I love it. So with that, thank you for listening, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
You've been listening to Conserving the Maine Outdoors with David Trahan and Mike Shaw on Legacy 1160 WSKW. Join the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine by going to sportsmansallianceofmaine.org and like us on Facebook.